Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio. Welcome to Policy and Rights, the show about human rights and government policy. Okay, we caught up with Annie Ohana on her way to a rally demonstrating for justice for Chantal Moore, and she's on a SkyTrain, so there's going to be some background noise, but you should be able to hear what Annie has to say fairly clearly about anti-racism, about inclusiveness of all people of all kinds into our society, and about what it means to be a human being, and what it means to be discriminated against, and how we can get rid of discrimination in our society. So let's get on with that conversation that we had with Annie. All right, welcome back, everyone. I'm here today with Annie Ohana, and by now everybody should know who Annie is. All right, buddy, here we go. Activist, teacher, politician, just a all around great person to get to know, because Annie stands for something. She doesn't just stand against something, but she stands for something positive for our world to strive for. So, with warm welcomes, welcome, Annie.
Thank you very much. It's very weird to hear the name politician, to be honest, because I don't. But that's okay. It's if we're looking for systemic change, then my hope is that we can get voices into power beyond mine. To be honest, that can really bring the change that we need. Right. So. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
thank you for that introduction.
Yeah. Well, you did run for office.
I did. Yes.
And you didn't. I will preface the politician part. You're not running just to self-serve your pockets. You're running to serve, which all elected officials should be doing. They should be running for that office to serve the community. And I think this is where we're starting to run into problems that we're seeing today. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and the reality that representation absolutely matters, and representation with a voice, right? So, what we're seeing is that when we're standing on the outside fighting and asking for change, the systems in place right now are very hard to move forward.
Yes.
Actually, they're white supremacists. They're built on settler colonial ideas. So. The idea of change can be very difficult. I cut out again?
Yeah, yes, you did. It sounds like you're moving and you're on a train.
Yeah, I am. I'm on a train. I'm headed down to a rally in downtown Vancouver for Chantal Moore, the young woman that was murdered by police in New Brunswick.
So while everybody is focused on of course George Floyd having been murdered by a police officer in the U.S., I should say allegedly murdered by a police officer in the U.S. because he hasn't been convicted yet. That it does happen. Of course, it happened here in Canada, and Canada prides itself on being more peaceful and understanding.
Yeah, peaceful for who? Right? Is probably the right question to ask there. And also that it's quite insidious, because we see it within education, we see it within policing, we see it within a lot of different institutions, that there is still that systemic violence, that systemic racism, very much ingrained in Canadian culture. And so, yes, we're deluged with things from the United States. Our media is kind of dominated by them. But at the same time, talk to anyone that is Indigenous or Black or a person of color, marginalized in some way, and you will hear stories of their daily experiences, right, where they face obstacles and barriers that certainly suggest that the peace is not a quiet one, right? It's very much more of a forced quietness, a willful ignorance, if one can think of that in terms of, what we actually see and what we think Canada's like.
Yeah. And other news stories that involve violence, of course, they talk more about gang violence and things like that. But the gang violence is centered around, of course, it is a Black person who is part of that gang. It is a Latin person who's part of the gang. It is a Southeast Asian person. We both live in the city of Surrey, BC, and the police actually targets the Southeast Asian population for having gang activity.
Sorry, go ahead.
But that's not always the truth, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a systemic cycle where you're seeing Black and brown bodies criminalized for doing anything, which is something that we can really think about when you think about things like our Indigenous, our First People standing up for their sovereignty and their rights, right? In trying to shut down Canada and trying to do so peacefully, and how that was criminalized, right? You have a Prime Minister, Prime Minister Trudeau, who willingly says that, what they're doing goes against the national interest of Canada, right? So, and we know that there's the labeling of terrorist, right, that goes along with that. I live and work in Surrey. I've almost for almost 10 years now, and we see that within our South Asian population as well, where because of the practice of racial profiling, because of a very misguided need to quote-unquote help, you see programs and initiatives that never take those individuals as positive, as contributors to society. Rather, it's always problematic. It's always seen as there must be something wrong. And that is very much part of the education system, where we're seeing Black, Indigenous people of color, where there's deficit thinking, and there's not really a strength-based approach to the idea of, who are you, what's your identity, and what are you, what are you learning, what are you providing to society, etc. And yes, and the amount my students have seen it, I've seen it, we've all seen it, where we see acts of racial profiling within our own police services, and so that is a question that just that's something that must be investigated and really troubled, and really that our police services need to be taken to task for that. We just saw in Alberta where the RCMP said, "Oh no, it's not really a thing." We know that not to be the case. So it definitely lives in the lives of anybody, again, that you talk to that is someone who is non-white, that they do face these realities in their daily lives.
Yeah. Okay, with the case of First Nations Chief Alan Adam in Alberta, which just happened 2 nights ago in a casino parking lot. And the video it is being shared on YouTube. You can actually go look for it, and you see that the police officer, he clearly just dives across the screen and tackles him. He's already there's already an officer that has Mr. Adam subdued. He's already he has his hands behind his back. He's got him subdued. There was no reasoning that I could see for another officer to have to dive across the screen to tackle him the way he did. because he was already was subdued. So
exactly.
And this is part of that systemic thing. And after you see that happen, then of course you see why do all these I guess there's up to 10 officers appeared in the frame. It's why this one person over a traffic stop because of an expired tag?
Yeah.
Why do we have to have so many more people show up over something like that? And it's probably because he's First Nations.
Yeah. It speaks to how, when we think about public safety, what an expired tag might mean or whatever it is that people are being stopped for, we really have to think about then within the police officer's mind or the entire structure for that matter. Are they seeing it as providing safety for all? Are they thinking that everything is a threat? And sadly, Indigenous folks, Black folks, people of color, for the most part, are seen as threats. Under the idea of prejudice that is needed in all of us, right? Under the systemic structures we have that were built out of settler colonialities, sadly, everything is seen as a threat. You can ever have effective policing if that purports that they're about community and like the ideas of peacekeeping, when all you do or what seems to be the norm is to just engage in putting out threats, and that is, you watch all those videos, it's just so common. There's a domination. There's multiple police cars, but and there's been so many social experiments done by people out there. The same does not hold true when you go into a white neighborhood, or if the individual in question that might have committed something is white themselves. This has just been proven. I don't think anybody can deny that. I teach law, and one of the things that we look at is how we view police, right? Just like your first impression. And it's interesting that you'll have some kids who have more positive experiences with policing, and therefore don't really see a problem. But you talk to other kids who, whether it's apprehension by police as Indigenous families, whether it's intergenerational trauma, right? There's all forms of things, right? Where they might have, they have trauma from incident or incidences, where they don't see, they haven't seen that quote unquote good side. Right? And yes, so from the case several nights ago, and again, I hear these stories constantly, right? Of their mindset, I don't believe is the way it needs to be if you're truly going to provide a safe space. And for the times when you do have a possible crime, is it really dealt with in a way that's restorative? In a way that protects the community, rather than threatens and criminalizes and dehumanizes the individual that you're looking at. Because the problem is, again, you're right? You have a chief who's treated as just a common criminal, and that's something that very much is, we have the Indian Act, right?
Yes.
Literally our system is built to do that. It's built to put Indigenous peoples and others under a very specific idea of who they are, what they are, and what they mean to Canada. Yeah.
There is something that, I grew up being a marginalized person, a visual minority, that there's one thing, it's like, yes, we are chanting this over and over again, Black Lives Matter, right? And in order for us to get to human lives matter, we have to get the colonialistic idea of what a human person is changed. That it is written in some of these documents through colonialism that the only way you can be a true human being is if you are male and you have white skin.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
And your lineage actually leads back to other people with white skin.
That's a great point. a very good point. And I can speak to a couple of examples on that. So when you look at Canada's immigration policies, and I don't just mean, back then, but even now, but specifically when we had, when you can look up, primary documentation with the Canadian government that had preferred immigrants, right? And right on top was British white, right? Like white British individuals.
Yes.
And then everybody else was categorized below that. And also I would point out the fact that when you have an American Constitution that labels black people as 2/3 of a human, right? So you have any numbers, and we can talk about the slave trade and any number of other experiences where our systems come from a root, like the root of it is where they did categorize people, and certain people were not considered human. Done. Right? You were an object. You were part of an economic system. Maybe you sat on resources that other people wanted, and so you were removed. It's very much the concept of terra nullius, the idea that there's nothing on the land. Well, when Christopher Columbus showed up, there were people on the land. When Champlain, when Cartier, when all the explorers, started to explore Canada, there were people on the land. And this notion that somehow our entire system is based on this idea that only certain people are human, and that is codified into law, really should let us to think, how far removed are we from that? And I don't think we are removed at all, sadly.
Sadly, no, we're not removed. You go back to the early 1600s, and up to that point, not only were there people on the land, there were countries with existing governments and cultures on the land.
Exactly.
The picture that's painted in our history books is that of a savage, somebody running around in a loincloth, and that's simply not the truth.
Yeah. Oh yes. Absolutely. These were civilizations, right? Mm-hmm. These were nations with technology and actually superior, for that matter. I always go back even to the Renaissance and the fact that, so my family's Moroccan. Mm-hmm. The first university was started in Morocco. A lot of the ideas we got for the Renaissance came from, North Africa, like just kind of, and Middle East, right? So how fascinating that has been completely whitewashed and taken over by white voices. So yes, no, our curriculum is still not there in celebrating that excellence, in celebrating that wealth of knowledge that did exist and was just erased through genocide. And I mean that across the world. So slavery was a form of genocide, right? It's not just that there's one little way it's a process that takes time. And then, I mean, to add to that too, we then raise the savage, so we say, they're warriors, braves, right? You think about Disney, or sports, and how they they appropriate indigenous ideas, without ever asking permission right? And so you see this weird idea that, the noble savage. So we're going to build this box, we're going to put you in this box, and then, we'll throw you a bone once every couple hundred years, but we're never actually going to talk about the fact that even the concept of warrior looks very different in indigenous nations than it does in, current day definitions. Yes.
Well, you talk about how Disney whitewashes things. One of the princess idea, of course, would be the indigenous princess according to Disney. The only thread of truth in the whole story that they tell is the names. The rest of it is totally fabricated. It doesn't even come close to the truth of what really happened.
Mm-hmm. And I think it bears pointing out then, so you have Disney that creates this narrative. Mm-hmm. That film did really well, right? Mm-hmm. So always to me, it's like, how do we reinforce the system? How do we ourselves look at ourselves internally to see what we are doing to be complicit, to perpetrate, to teach these ideals and these narratives. And I'm not trying to, I'm not trying to guilt anyone, but rather just to be introspective and to really think about that positionality and the way we need to reflect on ourselves. So all these narratives, from Disney to anything, the feather headdresses that people would wear to Coachella, right? Mm-hmm. All of this, it's fascinating to think that people are buying that. People are speaking about it. People are using it, right? People are sharing it. So why should the system change? They're making money, right? No one, and when I say no one, I mean like there isn't a large enough group of people saying no, right? We're not going to allow you to bastardize and, narratives on our history. And that's a burden, right? So for people that do exist in those marginalized realities, they have to fight so hard. And it really is, at this time, as Black Lives Matter and all of that, where are the white people at? Like where are the folks that contribute to the system, that have built the system, and continue to profit from the system? We all profit from Black culture, but are we really willing to take our own stance and then push the system to transform it, rather than just, hashtag Black Lives Matter and, just perform the idea that we care, but we don't use our money that way. We don't, the things that we consume, we still promote very much an economic system, a cultural system that actually does not elevate Indigenous, Black, or people of color.
Yeah, it's very true. When we look at our global leadership, especially the person who our prime minister who represents us on the global scale, versus Donald Trump, who represents the United States on a global scale. There seems to be a difference, but at this point, I actually question the motives of both men. Is Justin Trudeau citing that he wants to see more investigation done into Alan Adams because he saw what happened with George Floyd, and how Donald Trump took the stance that he did, and he's totally siding with police actions and things like that, and he's calling for the National Guard, which is of course a paramilitary organization in the United States, rather than the active military. There's a fine line between the two, and there's a very fine line in the U.S. between the two. But look what's happening there. Is he doing this just to keep the peace, or is he doing it because he really cares? And does it matter?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, and I think if you do your homework, I would suggest that the main research on, investigating what's going on, that's already been done. I'm thinking, at the top of my head, I think of things like the Downtown Eastside Women's Center, who produced a report called Red Women Rising, where they go into, and I shout out Harsha Walia, who was part of that, and who, they lay out very clear examples, but also solutions from, grassroots, from women that are going through the struggle. And actually, so it's there. And I mean, I can count to so many others, to be honest, right? So we know what's going on. People have studied this because, unfortunately, as many Indigenous Black people of color will know, your voice is not appreciated as much. You have to be the perfect model minority, right, to ever get anywhere. And so the amount of effort that's been put in to actually make their cases, where you see half-hearted, attempts by white politicians, to be quite honest, the level that others have to do is quite remarkable. So we've done the research, we've done the homework. Nobody says we shouldn't investigate further. We always want to make sure we have solutions that actually represent what's going on. But to suggest that somehow it hasn't been done is quite ludicrous. It really does raise a red flag in terms of, well, who exactly are you, and are you really the kind of leader that is really going to transform things, or are you just doing it to pander? Are you doing it to somehow placate, the protest, right? The protesters. Are you doing things to create a peace that is false? So when you mentioned the word peace earlier, again, really questioning that idea of what peace, whose peace, and exactly how do you define peace? It's like an ocean. The top of the water might be nice and smooth, but there's always a current underneath that can kill you, quite literally. So,
yes.
To me, it doesn't sit well with me when they're like, oh yeah, we'll investigate and we'll get somewhere. That time is over. That time has been over for a very long time. And I have to say that, he may take a knee, and yes, compared to Donald Trump, blah, blah, blah. But to be honest, if we're going to compare ourselves to the lowest standard possible, that's not good. That should never be how we do things. We should never say, yeah, but we're better than, the worst guy. I just don't see that. And I think Canadians need to use their votes better. We need to speak more to that. We need to really see a transformation of what we see as leadership. And I think if you look at the leader of New Zealand, for example, where she's really taking some pretty drastic measures, and she's doing it with speed. And it's not lost in this whole, we're just going to investigate. It's not a loop. It's very much action. And so I think there is, and I can speak to many more examples, but there is leadership out there doing that work. There's leadership in our own communities, in Indigenous communities, Black communities, people of color communities. That, again, we need to elevate. We need to start looking at them, because they do have the answers. There's incredible things going on in Black neighborhoods in America where they live a ghettoized experience. I say ghettoized as a process, right? Mm-hmm. So the fact that, they've been pushed into this reality, and they're creating incredible change, incredible systems of governance and public safety and health, all forms of things. Why aren't those people the ones that we see being put into the seats of power, so that we have actual people that can say, we know the answers? I'm done investigating, right? There's just way too many examples. My own students who spoke at the rally on Friday, and when people then say, oh, all lives matter, or really, there's no, is it really that bad at school? And I just tell them, please go watch the recorded, video, right? Please watch the live streams. Listen. Just listen and listen to the stories, and you'll actually realize, that you can actually find the answer much quicker, and you don't have to pretend, that you don't know yet.
Yeah. Okay, so last night they had our provincial government had a town hall meeting on anti-racism. And there was a continued theme in the comments, and I want to get your opinion on this. They said defund the police.
Right.
What does that mean to you?
Yeah, so not a new concept at all. First of all, if people are wondering, oh, why is this popping up? It's been something that a lot of people have been talking about. One of the main features of defunding the police is the notion that currently, as our budget stands, we continuously fund policing and increase their budgets. Now, if you think about the pot of money that's available, it is not infinite. And so what happens is that we have a system where policing is constantly given their wish list, but, healthcare, mental health, any other kind of frontline work is actually stripped. It's actually starved. It's actually, kind of left wanting. And I can speak to this firsthand in going into meetings where a lot of frontline workers doing amazing work, trying to elevate, trying not to criminalize, are left fighting for scraps. You apply for grants and you don't even get them. So then what, right? You have to shut your doors. So the idea of defunding the police is that we need to redistribute some of those funds. That, in fact, and to be clear, that the police are tasked with more and more work, but because they are a traumatizing reality to many people, because of their history, when you think about the RCMP and being that enforcement arm of the settler colonial takeover, the reality is all those things move forward. So in the case of Chantel Moore, who shows up to what should be a mental health checkup is the police. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, but guns do not solve mental health issues, right? Guns do not solve mental health issues. So that's the point. So, I hope people do their homework, because there is abolishing the police as well. I don't want to leave that out. So there are folks that will also say that we need to abolish the police. But to do that, you do have to think about the budgets, right? So you have cities that spend a huge amount, and provinces, and, depending on what the structure is like, that spend millions upon millions of dollars, simply, right now there's a push for body cams. And Harsha Walia pointed out, that's just giving more money to the police. You're not dealing with the realities of racism, with the realities of racial profiling, with the realities of poverty and criminalizing, brown and black bodies. Like, you're not actually dealing with the root problem. Once again, you're throwing money at what does not really do much but react rather than prevent. Yeah. So by defunding, we're moving those funds over, and trying to, and actually providing the support that is often asked for by our citizens, right? And it's also, to be honest, to kind of move away from militarization. We're seeing that, you look across the world, it's happening, but you compare, you look at what the police have available to them to use, and more, it's militarized weaponry. It's militarized, vehicles. It's militarized uniforms. And to me, that does not speak to a peace officer at all.
Yeah. Of course, the Surrey detachment of the RCMP, they own a tank.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
The Surrey RCMP detachment owns a tank. I've seen it.
Yes.
I've actually seen it roll. It pulled up 2 doors down from where I was living to take down a drug house.
Yeah.
Now, okay, I'm going to get to this, okay, because police, there are levels of police that really do chase down bad guys, but that level of police, we only see them in, say, the case where there was a stabbing in South Surrey, and I happened to be less than 300 feet away from where it actually happened, and I was asked questions in my home by a detective. That detective is actually chasing bad guys. Literally going after people who have committed a crime and trying to prove what actually happened, trying to test it. That level of policing does need to be funded, because yes, we do need that level. I can see that, but what I can't see is increasing the level of patrols on the street.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different opinions on that. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Instead of funding that, why don't we fund mental health people who show up when there's somebody down on the street who either, for whatever the drug is, they've consumed too much of whatever that drug is. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's a homeless person who's drunk, or if it's somebody who shot up heroin. It's like, when you have a person in body armor with a taser, a gun, and other assorted weaponry on them, all it does is freak people out.
Yes, and causes trauma, to be clear, right?
Yes.
So you have some violence that occurs there, mentally, emotionally. And like, again, there's a lot of different views on this. I encourage you to maybe bring on some of those people, right, that can speak more to their opinions. Because some folks will tell you, but even from the perspective of that baseline of policing, that's not necessary either, right? That if we are truly to decolonize, there's a lot of ways to make it work, right? So I have an example that I can give you in the sense of if you think of like the Robert Pickton case.
Yes.
So you had, at least as far as we know, the largest amount of, the worst serial killer in Canadian history, who basically targeted, preyed on women, often marginalized, often Indigenous, Black, people of color, and had, a wide variety of jobs and all kinds of things. But we do know he definitely had a prey. One of his grounds that he preyed on was the downtown east side. Because of the failure to see those women and to actively engage in investigation, because they just thought, they're Indigenous, they're sex workers, and I'm using the right term, right? They didn't use the word sex worker. They just move. These women disappear. Very patriarchal, very misogynistic ideas. That led to the death of 69 women, if not more. And so out of that, when Wally Opal did the inquiry on what went wrong, because he was active for decades, was the reality that they had, the communication had broken down, that Coquitlam police didn't really know what was going on with Vancouver, et cetera, et cetera. So they built better communications, right, from that, where now it's a more shared system. So that's, you say, okay, good, right? Like they did something to make things better. Again, the problem is you're not dealing with the underlying problem. And so I think when we think about policing, we shouldn't go to policing as the first solution. And I can tell you, I know officers that'll say the exact same thing, right? We're not going to arrest our way out of this problem. To react is already a failure.
Right.
I sat in a room with the Solicitor General, and they had a whole bunch of people talking about issues of gang violence, and an officer, and I won't say their name right now, but because it's public record. I think I could probably find it. That actually said, when we show up, we have failed. And I think we need to really start, like, in the discussion that needs to be had about what changes need to be made, whether that's abolishing or defunding or whatever, that we keep that in mind. When you have a family that has to deal with a stabbing, a hate crime incident, domestic abuse, rape, murder, whatever, that, again, we've already failed. The trauma already has happened. And I think that's the larger goal in all this. We need to stop using Band-Aid solutions to solve problems that are systemic, that are not individual, and yes, call on us to decolonize, call on us to really, really, really shake things up.
Yeah.
And I know that's a scary thought for some people. But the power imbalance as it is, we need to stop thinking that somehow we can access that power. It's so much out of our hands for most of us who live in North America. This idea of the American dream, or, we don't have a Canadian dream, but there's the idea of a Canada. These ideas are colonial, and they're not accessible. And we saw with COVID the reality of that.
Yeah. Just
how many millions of people do not have access to that, to that success.
Yeah. When we talk about colonialism, though, is a difference between America, it calls themselves a melting pot, and Canadians, they consider themselves to be the fruit salad. In either direction, it is colonialism, though. It doesn't matter that, we try to preserve the culture of everybody who lives here. It's still colonialism.
It still is.
And
it still is. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess if it's a fruit salad versus a melting pot, it's supposed to be a easier way to swallow colonialism, but it's still colonialism. And
look, we can theorize all day, right?
Mm-hmm.
And debate and get lost in these arguments, and for any number of reasons, like someone with privilege might win that argument because they're just, they have access to things that other people don't. But I say always look at the actions, right? Actions speak louder than words.
Mm-hmm.
Right before COVID, we were in the middle of some major, amazing activism by Indigenous nations to really hold the Canadian government accountable. And what happened? Right? People were talking about we should call the police in, and even worse, right? We should call the military in. I saw folks actively advocating for running their vehicles, their big rigs through crowds. The anger and the vitriol that Indigenous people face because they dared say this is not working. And literally a couple of weeks later, the whole country shut down anyways. So you want to know how colonialism still exists, even though it looks different. It operates differently. I mean, that's a sign of how ingrained the system is, that it can adapt, it can shift, it can look different, but it's still there.
Yes.
And again, I say just, 2020 has been pretty crazy, but just go back, a couple months, and you have a really, really big example, and even the election, I would say, where again, our prime minister makes it seem as if you're against pipelines, if you're trying to fight for, a true green revolution that is decolonized, somehow you're a terrorist, you're anti-Canadian. And, he's good with his language. The semantics, they never said that outright. But you know what? You say that when you have police show up and take down, the Wet'suwet'en, right? When
Yes.
you have, sharpshooters and all kinds of things. That to me shows how violent, that current actually is under that peaceful, top layer.
Right. Are we really looking for peace? Or are we looking for a conjoined, shared love that shows everybody is equal in just about every essential way possible?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in China they use the concept of harmony, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is very similar to peace. So, keep the harmony. But look at the human rights abuses that have occurred because of that. So This is not just a North American issue. Or Turtle Island, a lot of places in the world, they just conceptualize it differently. But it's very much an assimilative, genocidal, depending on where you are, kind of practice and process. And we need to learn that, we're like the frog in the boiling water. If you turn up the heat a little bit at a time, you don't know the difference. But we're headed to a very destructive path. Rather than going, wait a minute, why is the temperature rising, right? And how come it's been going on for so long? Yeah.
You're right. The temperature is rising in several different ways. And there are the answers are probably sitting right in front of our faces. I'm going to use the analogy of under our noses because we can't see what's under our nose.
Yeah.
Until we move our heads.
Right. That's a good one. Yeah.
And that's the whole point, is we have to move our heads, we have to adjust our frame of view so that we can see what is there, and I'm sure we have the answers to all this. We have the answers to how we solve the pandemic that's going on here in 2020. We have the answers to the systemic racism. We have the answers to the to what one of the underlying reasons for it. I'm going to put this a little differently. It is a little differently. It is somewhere along the line we criminalized poverty.
Right. Yeah.
And we have the answer to decriminalize poverty so that we all can feel equal, don't we? We have those answers.
Yeah. We really do.
Mm-hmm.
We really do. And we saw that a little bit with COVID when all of a sudden concepts of universal basic income started to come forward. Safe supply. I know it's not perfect. It's kind of almost like an experiment, but safe supply all of a sudden was put into place after years of asking for it.
Mm-hmm.
This is where it's really hard for people that are fighting for these rights. As was said at the Black Lives Rally on the first one that was held on a Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
An amazing black woman, Adele, said, "Why won't you fight for me? Why won't you fight for me?" So we see how in emergencies we're willing to step up and help, but this is an emergency too, right? The reality of systemic racism, the reality of our settler colonial system not being built for all of us, these are emergencies. And, just like I can't breathe, people cannot breathe. And the fact that so many of us are ignorant to that is highly problematic. And that's where the trauma comes, because we can wear the right shirt and put up the right Instagram post and attend a rally, but if we're actually not willing to really look at the people around us and to go, my God, you're drowning. Wait a minute, I haven't changed or transformed anything yet. We need to be doing more of that work because, again, this is a very, very difficult time for so many people. And I think, and I have to say, just absolutely, we criminalize poverty. We criminalize so many different things. And we really need to start realizing that those things happen through microaggressions. They happen through 1,000 cuts. There is no major, riot where the police storm in, and I mean riot by the police, not the protesters. Mm-hmm. Where there's like like Jallianwala Bagh in 1919 in Amritsar, where the British, Empire comes in and slaughters hundreds and hundreds of people near the Golden Temple. You're not really going to see that happen here, right?
No.
But it's happening just in hidden ways, in ways that are so normalized that we teach about it at school. Like mm-hmm. we perpetrate it, right? We don't have, we're not as inclusive. We don't have the right resources. And for the most part, we don't really question that enough. So that's violence too.
Yes. It's good. It's going to take all of us coming together to see any real change.
Yeah.
In the U.S., a White House representative after they tear gassed people in front of a church. She came on and she started quoting from Martin Luther King about his "I Have a Dream" speech.
Yeah.
In order for Martin Luther King had a legitimate dream, a real dream, that dream of equality for everyone. It doesn't matter that we see what is inside of people, and in order for that dream to happen, we have to find not only the right leadership but the right systems to make those things happen, right? Yeah. So
absolutely. And Martin Luther King Jr. has been so he was a radical. Mm-hmm. He called out the economic system. He was calling out Vietnam. And he was really turning into that more radicalized notion, especially, right before he was assassinated. And again, it's just, I should step away. Sorry, I've arrived at the rally.
Okay.
So the fact that we see we see him being appropriated once again. And, oh, no, he wouldn't want this. He wouldn't want that. Are you kidding me? He wants it all, right? When he spoke about what changes needed to happen, they were deep. They were systemic. And absolutely, the idea is that you look at someone's character, right? Absolutely, you look at beyond just what someone looks like. But what he wanted to do was dismantle that white supremacist, that racist structure, right? So that what you look like doesn't matter. It wasn't that he didn't believe that there was a white system, right? A white supremacist system. Absolutely, he believed it, and that's what he was really getting at. And again, it's a lot of people, pushing out those deeper quotes and those speeches that he gave that maybe didn't get, all the attention, because sadly, he died he was murdered at 39, right? He was very young, and so again, this idea that I know the messaging might be harsh for some folks. But that's where you learn. That's where you change. That discomfort, that moment of, wait, what? And the reality of that we need to validate people's anger. This is people's lives. These are people's entire existences for thousands of years. Mm-hmm. And this notion that somehow you have to sit down, be quiet, protest the right way, as we now see, there is no way to protest. The system will continually try to shut down protests. Every single time.
Yeah.
There is, and so when you're up against a wall like that, what do you think's going to happen? And, I think it's a message of solidarity to say for those of us with privilege, including myself, what's something we can do to normalize this notion of system disrupting, of really finding ways to come together so that the anger, is not shut down. If we can truly use that privilege and our spaces to have those conversations, maybe then we can move forward. Maybe then there's that path of reconciliation. There's that path to actually, transform the system. But I think sadly I don't see that as much right now. It's still very early days, and I know there's a lot of concerns that even with police brutality, a Band-Aid will be slapped over it again, and we'll have to wait for the next time. And, and I have to say, what's truly sad is that the next time is not far away.
No.
Look at Canada. The next time is literally a day from now, right? And so this idea that somehow these don't happen often, they happen every day. And again, that's why, so why aren't we galvanized more, right? Why aren't hundreds of millions taken to the streets of America, right? Why, we have 37 million in Canada, something like that. Why don't we have tens of millions attending rallies? We still have a lot more to do in terms of truly showing the system that we no longer want it, that it never worked. And that's where my head's at right now in terms of, what to do to move forward.
Yeah. So there's a lot of work to be done, and we are looking at an unknown. Also, we don't know what the result is, and we have to somehow or another push our leadership to strive out for that unknown that actually brings all of us together. So.
Absolutely, and at the end of the day, I think the reality is we have to change our leadership. Mm-hmm. I think most people can only point to a handful of people that they actually trust, that they actually think believe in systemic change. And to me, it's a bit of a clarion call. It's a bit of a notice to our politicians at every level. The time is to step up. The time to step up is now. And if all you give us is performative kind of actions, do not treat the electorate as idiots. Do not treat the activists and the people fighting for their lives as if 3-4 words will solve all these problems. We're listening, we're being critical, and we are going to hold them accountable. I only hope there's an election in November in America. There's the provincial elections are coming not too long from now. The times will come when in our democracy, since we use the voting system, then we have to step up and make sure that accountability is a strong one. and that we truly use our votes to show that we're sick of, the same old.
We have to ensure also that we have systems that counts every vote.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's a great point.
I think that here in Canada we do have a potential leader that and while this is a political show, this is not a campaign thing at all. I don't really support any one particular party. I'm going to preface that when I say that I think that Jagmeet has some really good ideas of how we can get move forward and find those right ideas. I think that Jagmeet has some really good ideas towards that. And I'm not singling him out just to be an NDP person, but I'm singling him out because I like his ideas.
Yeah, and I think, putting politics aside, you're seeing someone that does not hold the opposition party position, right? So, by the numbers, it doesn't seem like there'd be a lot of power. But in this emergency, time, has steps forward to change the direction. And I agree. So when I look at leaders, I look at the ability to dialogue. I look at the ability to, to take action no matter what, no matter how small you are, no matter how people say, you don't really have power, to really take the time and take that space. And I've seen that out of him, more than Trudeau, more than Scheer, more than the other, national leaders, for sure.
Yeah. He has an innate willingness to want to work with others to fix issues, and that's what our leadership needs to have happen. That's what those sort of ideas were present in World War II.
Mm-hmm.
The leadership willing and wanting to work with each other to solve what was the issue at the time, and in what was a genocide then. So, I think in some respects we're facing a genocide. It's just it has a little different face than what it did in World War II.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I go back even further to things like the Iroquois Confederacy, indigenous forms of governance that, they came to the table willing to talk and in stewardship, right? In the ideas of using eldership, right? To kind of guide the way forward. So we've seen multiple examples of how that's possible. I looked at things like in Rwanda, and their truth and reconciliation work there. In South Africa, right? Like there's the work being done currently by Uyghur Muslims in China and Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar. There's so much leadership and ways to take action. And again, I think as Canadians, we need to stop being complacent that, half-hearted is good enough. That, well, we're not the States, which is a lie, obviously, but, that's what's said. Like these notions, it just shows how much privilege we're steeped in, how much ignorance we have within ourselves, and how we're not really questioning our own prejudice that allows us to build these blind spots. It's just, it goes back to the idea of who we are as people, and we can talk a good game, but do we actually practice it? And our government models, they take advantage of that. They almost prefer apathy. They prefer a populace that doesn't really question things. And I think as an educator, teaching that critical thinking skill, teaching that problem posing, teaching that liberatory framework is, to have one's identity come forward, that is what we need to do instead of pushing content that is often Eurocentric and erases many other stories. And so I think, I would say to anyone listening is that idea of who are you, what's your privilege, what position, what spaces do you hold, and to just keep thinking. No one's perfect. We always learn, we always grow. We take action, if we do something wrong. but we have to address it as something that's not one way. There's violence to it, right? Our actions have consequences. So, while the government's a large entity and people might feel overwhelmed as to how to take that on, really the work starts within. And if we all did that, it would actually take the burden off just certain Indigenous people, Black people of color to do that fight. Actually, the work is on white folks and white passing folks, and to really think about how we can help shoulder that burden. And learning and educating ourselves has to be step number one.
Thank you for that, and you know what, we're gonna close on those words, and thank everybody for listening, because that was very well put.
Right. Always a pleasure.
All right. Until next time, for everybody listening, Annie, please give a call anytime you have a thought, or that there's something that needs to be said. Okay.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Annie. All right.
All right. Bye.
All right. Bye. This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.